Gentleman yields back. Last but not least, Mr. Nunn's recognized.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much, and to the Foreign Affairs Committee for having us here today. I want to first off thank the Gold Star families who joined us. I want to thank the veterans who stood up both in Afghanistan and beyond to help save lives. To the civilians, to the volunteers, to our allies across the board, many of us served in Afghanistan, and many more have served on Signal, in chat rooms, and at the wee hours of the morning while doing our main job to help save Americans, our allies, and the future of this country. Specifically, I want to thank Sergeant Vargas. You are a reflection of so many young men and women who went to serve our country in the best way possible. While you manned the post as a sniper, you provided countless hours of overwatch, protecting so many on the ground, including a young man from my district, a Marine, Specialist Deacon Page, who died at Abbey Gate. You knew the right thing to do. Leadership did not empower you to be able to save lives, and that is not on you. Thank you for your service. Beginning on the 26th of August, so many of you in this room, who I see both as friends, as allies, as a band of brothers and sisters who stood up, thank you. When HKIA fell, hundreds of Americans were left outside the wire. Thousands of our friends and allies who had stood with us for decades, putting their life ahead of ours, jeopardizing what their children and their future looked like to make sure we were able to get on those aircraft and fly out. I'm honored to be able to, just this week, honor Major Lunning, who was the last medical nurse to fly out with a group of Americans and Afghans on the C-17 that saved their lives as they traveled to Germany. Unfortunately, hundreds more had to be left behind. I want to tell briefly the story of the Syed family who was at the bombing at Abbey Gate. We first came into contact with him. I've done 3 combat tours, flying recon operations over, and our interpreter, who did 9 combat tours with us, was saved and is now a U.S. citizen in my community back home. But contacting us, they identified that this engineer, a grandfather, who had worked with the U.S. Embassy, who was promised evacuation, who went to Abbey Gate, was hit in the explosion. Despite the fact that he was mangled, the Taliban approached him and they said, "What did you do for the Americans? Why are you leaving our country?" He said, "I'm an engineer. I help build waterways." What is an engineer? I build a future for our country, for our children. They immediately shot him in the leg and left him for dead in the middle of the street in front of his children. Despite this, Mr. Syed walked across an open battlefield to save his 2 young children and his wife and asked for evacuation. We were working an operation at Mazar Sharif at the time, working with CAM Airways. Members who had never met each other, Americans and folks around the world, formed a group called Task Force Argo. And together we were able to get 5 flights out of Mazar Sharif in the north and save 3,000 Afghan allies and 40 Americans on that first flight of 380. But that is only part of the story. The true heroism exists in the faces of each of you in this room, who, despite the fact that you reached out for help from our federal government, you got no answer. Now, Mr. Syed was able to not only navigate a caravan of 40 vehicles north over an 8-hour journey, we asked him, would you please pick up 2 young women whose husband has gone missing? They were students, and on Monday, they were going to university. By the middle of the week, they were beaten in the street because they did not have a head covering. Their future was one of rape and forced marriage. But for Mr. Syed, he put them in the back of his Toyota Corolla with his small children, and together they made this journey north. They were stopped multiple times throughout the night by the Taliban, and they were asked time and time again, "Who are these women?" And he would say, "I am their grandfather. We are going to a wedding." But this cover story was not developed out of thin air. It was the work of volunteers who helped at every checkpoint report back on what was going on, who helped provide a clean pathway and made sure that there was a safe harbor when they arrived in Mazar Sharif. And over the course of the next weeks that turned into months, flight after flight saved these individuals. There are many of you who are on this panel today, and I cannot thank you enough. This digital Dunkirk, this rescue from Afghanistan, is a direct reflection of what you did to save these lives, the lives of people who had spent decades saving ours. So with that, France, I want to first of all commend you and everything that you did to help evacuate with your team and the hundreds of volunteers behind the scenes, not just here, but around the world, who did that. I want to speak specifically to the issue of flying folks out of Mazar Sharif. Was the U.S. State Department or the Taliban the harder force in being able to get those aircraft off the ground and save those lives?
They were equally hard, Congressman. I mean, in both cases, both were operating from a place of confusion, of lack of information, and lack of authority. Literally, both sides of the government coin.
Adrian, I'd like to speak to you on what the U.S. government's. Was there ever a single point of contact within State Department that you could reach out to, that you had the ability to, Colonel, to actually have a conversation to seek evacuation?
There was not, Congressman, really, that we ever found. What we found that worked very well was Aiden's unit in particular was very responsive and looking to do more, and they had what seemed to be a very good working relationship with State Department at Apron 8 for out processing. So we really relied on them to do that. We could never figure out how to do that direct engagement.
And France, you talk about a moral obligation that we have. Is there also a national security implication for what has occurred?
Congressman, when we left Afghanistan, we not only left behind allies, we left behind our honor. We left behind our credibility. If we want allies to fight alongside us in the future, we need to be credible when we tell them that we're going to stand by them. We need the strategic option of working by, with, and through allies in the future. And without the credibility that comes from standing by the allies in Afghanistan, we're not going to get that cooperation in future fights. And then we're going to have to either choose as a nation to be less effective on the global stage or choose to spend more of America's blood and treasure to achieve the same outcomes.
France, thank you. Mr. Chair, my appreciation, because what was our darkest hour in Afghanistan is made better by the actions that each of you took to be able to save lives and chart a better course for our country. We on this panel owe it to you to be able to get answers and truth so this never happens again. With that, Mr. Chair, thank you, and I yield back.